You feel lost because you keep trying to find something that was never lost. From the moment we're old enough to understand the word identity, we're told to go look for it. Find your purpose, find your passion, find your truth. And so the hunt begins, one that most people never stop. You scroll through social media, comparing yourself to people who seem like they've figured it all out. You chase lifestyles, follow routines, try on philosophies like their outfits, each one promising, this will be it. This is who you are. But after all that effort, all that noise, and all that trying, you still feel hollow. Not because you haven't found the real you, but because you keep believing you're somewhere else. You've turned your identity into a puzzle, and now every moment feels like something you need to solve. But what if there's nothing to solve? What if the version of you that's quiet, still, and not reaching is already complete? The search becomes the disguise. You don't feel lost because you lack something. You feel lost because you've trained your mind to believe you're incomplete. And the longer you keep searching for yourself out there, the more disconnected you become from what's always been here. You've been told your whole life that you're supposed to become something, become successful, become confident, become your highest self. So naturally, you assume that who you are right now isn't enough. You treat the present moment like a waiting room for the real you to finally show up. But pause. Really sit with that. This constant obsession with becoming, it's quietly built on the idea that your current self isn't worthy, so you wear masks. Try harder. Shapeshift just enough to be liked, accepted, admired. And what does that create? A split inside you. You start living with two selves, the one you actually are and the one you think you should be. And that gap between them, that's where the feeling of being lost lives. No matter how far you climb, how many habits you perfect, how spiritual you try to act, if it's all rooted in the belief that you need to find yourself, then you'll keep reinforcing the lie that you're missing. You'll build castles on sand. You'll chase sunsets that never stay. You'll keep asking, who am I? And never be satisfied with the answer. But here's the part no one says out loud. You don't find yourself by adding more. You remember yourself by subtracting. When you stop trying to be impressive, when you stop performing for the world, when you stop narrating your life like a movie with a hero arc, that's when you begin to feel again. Not for show, not for success, just feel. And in that quiet space where you're no longer proving anything, there you are, still, undeniably present, not becoming, just being. Somewhere along the way, you were convinced that you are a project, a constant work in progress, a puzzle that always needs one more missing piece. So you started treating your existence like a checklist. Fix your mindset, heal your past, build better habits. You convinced yourself that if you just fix a few more things, you'll finally arrive. But where? Where exactly is that destination? Because here's the honest truth. The finish line keeps moving. The more you improve, the more flaws you find. The better you get, the more pressure you feel to maintain that image. And it never ends. That's the trap. You think you're growing, but in reality, you're just polishing the mask. You're just making your ego look more spiritual, more productive, more aligned. You don't need to become some perfect, ideal version of yourself. You don't need to sculpt your identity like it's some statue you're carving from stone. You're not a task to be completed, you're an experience to be lived. And ironically, the moment you stop fixing yourself, you actually start healing. Because you're no longer approaching yourself like a broken object. You're meeting yourself with softness, curiosity, acceptance. You realize the pain wasn't always from your past. It was from the way you kept trying to escape the present. You don't need to reinvent yourself. You need to meet the self that's been patiently sitting beneath all that noise, waiting for you to stop trying so hard to become so you can finally learn how to simply be. Here's something no one ever explains clearly. The version of you that feels lost is actually the version that's addicted to movement. Not just physical movement, mental movement, constant analyzing, daydreaming, planning, comparing, regretting, always somewhere else. You wake up and within seconds your mind is sprinting. What do I need to fix? Who do I need to be? What am I missing? And that speed becomes your identity. You feel alive when you're chasing, when there's something just out of reach. But when everything goes quiet, when there's no goal, no crisis, no distraction, you suddenly feel empty, anxious, like something's wrong. That discomfort, that's not you being lost. That's you meeting stillness for the first time in weeks, maybe years. And it feels uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar. But that stillness is sacred. It's not the absence of life. It's the place where life starts speaking to you differently. When you're no longer running, the truth finally catches up. You begin to notice the subtleties, your breath, the tension in your chest, the stories you've been telling yourself on loop. And slowly, something wild happens. You realize you were never lost. You were just moving too fast to recognize where you already were. It's like sitting in a storm, waiting for the rain to stop, only to realize you've been standing under a shelter the whole time. You don't need to escape the moment. You need to return to it. Because in that stillness, without filters, without labels, without noise, that's where you remember who you are. Not as a concept, not as an idea, but as a direct experience. Not a story, not a role, just presence. One of the biggest reasons you feel lost is because you keep mistaking mental noise for direction. You hear a voice in your head and immediately believe it must be guidance. You feel pressure and assume it must mean something urgent. But most of what you call intuition is just leftover programming. Old fear disguised as wisdom. Old pain dressed up as caution. And so you keep following it, not because it's right, but because it's loud. The voice that tells you you're not good enough unless you're achieving something, that's not direction. That's conditioning. The voice that says you'll be happy once you're there, wherever there is, that's the illusion whispering to keep you chasing your tail. And here's the tricky part. The real you, the one you're looking for, speaks softly. It doesn't shout. It doesn't panic. It just is. It's the part of you that notices without judgment. The part that watches the fear come up and doesn't flinch. The part that can sit in complete uncertainty and still feel whole. But you won't hear that part until you stop confusing the static for a signal. You've been tuning into the wrong frequency. You've been listening to the anxious mind narrating your life like a crisis. But your clarity doesn't scream, it waits. And when you're finally quiet enough to hear it, you'll realize it's been here the whole time. Beneath the layers of opinions, fears, projections, still, anchored, free. You never needed more answers. You needed fewer distractions. The truth about who you are has always been here, but it doesn't compete for your attention. It's patient. It lets you run. It lets you chase. And when you're exhausted from it all, it's still there, exactly where you left it. Every time you search for yourself, you reinforce the idea that you are somewhere else, that you'll feel whole once you read one more book, once you try that new routine, once you fix that one part of you you're secretly ashamed of. And that's the trap, because the search itself creates the illusion that you're not already home. It's like having a map to a treasure, not realizing you're standing on it. So you leave, you walk, you explore every possible direction, and with every step further from yourself, you start feeling more confused, more disconnected, more hollow. You think the emptiness is proof that something is missing, but really it's just distance. Distance from your own inner stillness, from the version of you that doesn't need anything to be valid. And what's wild is, the more effort you put into finding yourself, the more you actually forget how to just be. You stop noticing the way your breath moves. You ignore how often your body gives you quiet signals. You overlook how peaceful a moment can be when you stop trying to extract meaning from it. You trade presence for progress. And no matter how much you accomplish, you still feel like a stranger to your own life. But when you stop searching, something incredible happens. You start noticing the way the light spills through your window, the way you laugh when no one's around, the way you soften when you're not trying to impress anyone. That's not you finding yourself. That's you remembering who you were before the world told you to be anything else. You weren't born lost. You were born aware. You only started feeling lost when you began believing you had to become someone more acceptable. But the truth? You've never been too far from yourself. You just stopped listening to the quiet parts. Here's something that might feel uncomfortable at first. You were never meant to be clearly defined. Not by your job, not by your style, not by your past, your pain, or even your healing. But we live in a world obsessed with clarity. People want to know what you are, what you stand for, what box you fit into. And over time, you start playing along. You choose labels. You stick to a certain version of yourself. And without realizing it, you become smaller than you truly are. You flatten yourself for the sake of being understood. But you're not a fixed identity. You're a moving experience, a living contradiction, a soul that shifts shape with each moment of awareness. Some days you're soft, other days sharp, sometimes deeply still, other times on fire with movement. And that doesn't mean you're broken or inconsistent, it means you're alive. You lose yourself every time you try to be one single thing. And that sense of being lost, it's not a sign that something's wrong. It's a sign that you're too vast to be trapped inside the idea of a personality. The ego wants to be certain. It wants to say, this is who I am, this is my role. But your soul doesn't care about those boundaries. It's not interested in making sense. It's interested in freedom. And sometimes the most liberating thing you can do is admit that you don't fully know who you are. And that maybe you don't need to. Because the more you try to define yourself, the more you shrink to fit inside that definition. But the more you allow yourself to stay open, uncertain, curious, present, the more your real self comes to the surface. Not as a fixed answer, but as a feeling that needs no words. You weren't meant to be summed up. You were meant to be felt. There's a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, where you stop looking for answers and start feeling the weight lift. No fireworks, no dramatic breakthrough, just a slow exhale, like something inside you finally unclenched. That's the moment you stop searching for yourself, not because you gave up, but because you remembered there was nowhere to search. You were never hidden, never missing, just buried under expectations, comparisons, distractions, noise. And once the search stops, everything sharpens. The world feels less like a maze and more like a mirror. The pressure to be someone fades. You no longer measure yourself by how productive you are, or how enlightened you seem, or how well you fit the version of you that others admire. You become simple again, real again. You walk slower, you listen more. You stop interrupting life with your thoughts and let it speak instead. You realize being found wasn't about reaching some perfect version of yourself. It was about relaxing into the truth that was always here. And that truth, it doesn't need an introduction, it doesn't need a label, it just needs your presence. So stop chasing, stop fixing, stop auditioning for a role you already own. Sit, breathe, notice. You're not lost, you're home. You always were. And now that you remember that, now that you've returned to this moment, here's your challenge. Don't leave it. For the next few hours, stay here. Resist the pull to distract, to define, to scroll your way back into noise. Stay close to the stillness that knows you better than any idea of you ever will. And if this message brought you clarity, if it helped you feel just a little more you, drop the word returning in the comments. Let's see how many of us are quietly finding our way back.